Peace and mercy be upon you. Good evening, our dearest audience, and good evening to your program Russia English Cafe. Today we have another story of Prophet, which will be continued to the next episode, or we will tackle the story of the son of this Prophet. So today we have the story of Prophet Zakariya, peace be upon him, عليه أفضل الصلوات والسلام. The next episode we will tackle the story of Prophet Yahya, the son of Prophet Zakariya. أهلا وسهلا بحضراتكم عبر أثير إذاعة شمال الصعيد وعبر برنامجكم رشا إنجليش كافيه. كل عام وحضراتكم بألف خير. مستمرين مع حضراتكم طوال شهر رمضان في تقديم قصص الأنبياء ولكن بطريقة مبسطة باللغة الإنجليزية. النهاردة هنشوف مع حضراتكم story of Prophet زكريا. هناخد قصة نبي الله زكريا وهنكمل المرة الجاية مع قصة نبي الله يحيى. So let's start.
Prophet stories are amazing. We like to hear the prophet stories. We like to hear the prophet stories.
Are you ready for the next story? Insha'Allah, I am going to tell you the story of Prophet Zakariya alayhi salam today. A long time had passed since the death of Prophet Uzair alayhi salam, and the children of Israel reverted to their characteristics of stirring mischief amongst each other. They claimed Allah was stingy and that Allah withheld from them. These claims are the direct opposite of Allah's generosity. Bani Israel considered themselves to be the chosen people of Allah above other races, in direct contradiction of the teachings of racial equality in Islam. During this time, there lived amongst Bani Israel a man by the name of Imran. He was so renowned for his piety that his was considered to be one of the best families of all time. He was not a prophet or a messenger, but his household was so noble and elevated in Allah's kingdom that there is even an entire chapter in the Quran named after it. Imran had a pious wife, and her sister was married to Prophet Zakariya alayhi salam. The Quran does not provide accounts of Prophet Zakariya's alayhi salam childhood or youth. Hence, the story of Zakariya alayhi salam begins in his late adulthood, when he was elderly. He was a prophet and messenger of Bani Israel. He is a direct descendant of Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. Prophet Zakariya alayhi salam was a carpenter and led a simple life. The Prophet was constantly in a state of gratitude to Allah and was intensely humble in his demeanor. Like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he and his wife had already reached an extreme old age without having any children. Meanwhile, the wife of Imran, his sister-in-law, gave birth to Maryam alayhi salam, and she pledged to dedicate Maryam alayhi salam towards pure servitude to Allah. Shortly after the birth of Maryam alayhi salam, her father Imran passed away. This sparked off a dispute within Bani Israel on her guardianship. Zakariya alayhi salam should have been the obvious choice. He was her uncle by marriage, and moreover was a prophet whose moral character and piety were beyond question. But, true to their character, Bani Israel disputed this choice, for they wanted the prestige of raising Imran's daughter. The people eventually agreed that they should cast lots to decide the matter. All the candidates wrote down their names on pens and put them in a container. A child was sent to pick one at random. The pen that was selected bore Zakariya alayhi salam's name. Dissatisfied at the outcome, some of them asked for the cast to be repeated. This time, the claimants put all their pens in the river. The pen that would swim against the current would win the guardianship. Again, it was the pen of Zakariya alayhi salam that won. Still stubborn and quarrelsome, they demanded a third round. This time, they decided that whichever pen swam with the current would win the cast. Yet again, it was only Zakariya's alayhi salam pen that differed from the rest, swimming with the current. Observe the power of Allah. People may plot and plan, but what is written will take place. Thus, Bani Israel had no choice but to acknowledge that Zakariya alayhi salam was entitled to assume the guardianship of Maryam alayhi salam. Maryam alayhi salam grew up as a righteous woman. From her childhood, she was in a state of prayer, positioned in seclusion away from the people in an enclosure within Bayt al-Maqdis, specially built for her. There were some strange things going on. Every time the Prophet, as her guardian, checked on her, always found her surrounded by an abundance of food. This was not food that he brought for her. So how did it find its way into her private sanctuary? More strangely, the fruits did not belong to the climate as well. He asked her where it was from, and she replied that it was from Allah. Witnessing these miracles repeatedly only reaffirmed the Prophet's faith in Allah. Like his ancestor Ibrahim alayhi salam, he had always yearned for a child to continue the legacy of prophethood, but his wife was unable to bear children. He did not want children to inherit his wealth, but rather a son who would continue spreading the message and knowledge of Islam. Encouraged by the miracles he had witnessed, he prayed with utmost conviction to Allah. Before long, Allah responded to his prayer. One day, when the Prophet was in prayer, the angels arrived bearing the good news in his prayer chamber. They told him that his wife's barrenness had been cured, and they were to have a son who would also become a prophet. "You must name your son Yahya," said the angels. Moreover, the son had the honor of being named by Allah himself, with a name that had never existed in mankind's history. Nevertheless, the Prophet was astounded by the news, and he burst out, "My Lord, how will I have a boy when I have reached old age and my wife is barren?" The angel said, "Such is Allah. He does what He wills." The Prophet continued, "My Lord, make for me a sign." To this, the angels replied, "Your sign is that you will not be able to speak to the people for 3 days except by gesture. And remember your Lord much, and exalt him with praise in the evening and in the morning." True to Allah's promise, his wife soon delivered a son, and he was named Yahya alayhi salam. His son Yahya alayhi salam grew up and became a prophet as well. I shall tell you the story of Yahya alayhi salam in the next episode. But to summarize it, Yahya alayhi salam was brutally murdered. Imagine the heartbreak that Zakariya alayhi salam must have felt. Yahya alayhi salam was the ideal son, for not only was he an exceptionally devoted servant to Allah, but he was also kind and generous to his parents. When Yahya alayhi salam was murdered, there was crisis among Bani Israel. According to reports, emboldened by the murder of Yahya alayhi salam, Bani Israel decided to turn against his father too. A mob, bent on hatred and destruction, set out to kill Zakariya alayhi salam. Such was their arrogance and disbelief that they were willing to murder their own prophets. The old prophet managed to flee. With Allah's will, a tree opened its trunk and allowed the prophet to hide inside and then wrapped him up. However, the shaitan pulled a fragment of the prophet's clothes through the crack, thus exposing him. According to some reports, the pursuers initially wanted to set the tree on fire, but then decided instead to saw the tree in half, along with the prophet in it. This was how his life abruptly ended, by the evil hands of the very people he was trying to guide.
سمعنا مع حضراتكم قصة سيدنا زكريا، بس هنشوف الترجمة. قصة بتقول إن سيدنا زكريا عايش في بيت المقدس في فلسطين، وكان قد وهب نفسه للعبادة وخدمة بيت المقدس مع آخرين زيه. كان هدفهم إبقاء شريعة سيدنا موسى كما جاء بها من عند الله سبحانه وتعالى والمحافظة على تلك الشريعة. لكن التجار اللي عايشوا في المدينة كانوا بيحاربون شريعة ربنا أو الشريعة دي، وكانوا عاوزين يفرضوا سيطرتهم وأوامرهم على الناس. سيدنا زكريا كان بيحاربهم وحده ودون أن يسانده أي أحد، وكان بلغ من العمر 90 عاما، كان عنده 90 سنة، وما كانش عنده ولد يورثه أو ولد يبقى معاه، وكان يتمنى أن يكون ليه ولد يورثه أو يورث حكمته وعلمه ويقود الدعوة من بعده. في يوم من الأيام كان بيزور مريم ابنة عمران في محرابها ليطمئن عليها، فوجد عندها خير كتير وطعام كتير، فسألها عن مصدر الخير ده ومصدر الطعام، فقالت إنه من عند الله، الله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب. هنا حس سيدنا زكريا برغبته في دعاء ربنا إنه يهبه وريث يحمل الرسالة من بعده، فبما إن الرزق من عند الله كذلك الأبناء هم هبة أيضا من عند الله سبحانه وتعالى. اعتزل سيدنا زكريا في محرابه وهو يرجو من الله أن يرزقه الولد الذي يتمناه، وما فاتش وقت كتير، لكن ربنا استجاب لدعاء سيدنا زكريا وأرسل إليه الملائكة لتبشره. فقالت له إن الله يبشرك بغلام اسمه يحيى، وهو اسم لم يسمى به أحد من قبل. فرح جدا سيدنا زكريا، ولكنه نظر إلى شيخوخته وإلى زوجته التي لم تنجب أبدا وهو عدى 90، وسأل ربه إزاي يكون لي ولد وقد بلغ هذا العمر وزوجته عاقر لم تنجب قط. ربنا رد عليه وقال له إن هذا الأمر هين علي، وهو إنما يقول للشيء كن فيكون. فسأله زكريا عن آية أو علامة، فأمره ربنا إنه بالانقطاع عن ألا يكلم الناس 3 ليال سوية، ما يكلمش الناس 3 أيام ورا بعض. سيدنا زكريا عمل زي ما ربنا قال له، ولما خرج من المحراب أشار للناس ليسبحوا الله بكرة وعشية، وتحققت البشارة رزق سيدنا زكريا أو رزق الله سبحانه وتعالى سيدنا زكريا بيحيى ليستلم الرسالة من بعده. دي كانت قصة سيدنا زكريا. هنكمل مع حضراتكم المرة الجاية قصة سيدنا يحيى. شوف حضراتكم على ألف خير. Stay tuned. دكتور رشا يوسف.